The video is real, and it changes everything. The sentence booms like thunder, ringing out across the cavernous walls of the court. Each head swiveled toward the screen. Each intake of breath echoed in the heavy hush that hung like a blanket in the courtroom. The air was heavy, almost palpable, as the big monitor flickered, displaying Meri Brown in an intimate, bearing moment, one she had never meant anyone to see. For the first time in months, the cameras that had shadowed her every step couldn't conceal the unvarnished truth. The woman millions believed they knew was laid bare in a way that no reality show ever had before. Whispers poured through the room like a ripple on a pond. Some were disbelieving, some critical, some understanding, but all were loud enough to emphasize the suspense, like sharp cracks. The click of camera shutters mingled with the murmurs, creating a chaotic symphony of curiosity and scandal. Even the judge, a man renowned for his composure and stern demeanor, leaned forward in disbelief, eyebrows knitted tightly together. This was no ordinary court day. This was history in the making, and everyone in that room felt it. Mary's heart pounded violently in her chest. Every beat was a drum of tension, a countdown to something unseen. She had been scrutinized before, suffered the constant eye of the cameras, tabloids, and social media bullies. She had weathered attacks, gossip, and heartbreak televised to millions of people, but nothing could have readied her for this unshielded, stripped-bare exposure. The reality of her existence, her errors, her weaknesses, had been reduced to a single image on a screen, now being examined by a court clamoring for explanations. The opposing attorney, a striking blue-eyed woman with a reputation for devastating her opponents, stood up with a languid, calculated ease. Her heels rang out sharply against the gleaming floor, each step falling ominously. She faced the jury, a smirk playing on her mouth, and in a voice heavy with assurance and accusation, she started this video. She stated, allowing the words to float in the air like smoke, document secret truths that have to be taken into account for this case. It demonstrates deception, manipulation, and betrayal. The courtroom nearly shook with the vehemence of her statement. All eyes were fixed on Meri, seeking even the smallest fissure, the mere hint of guilt. Her family, seated stiffly in the front row, solidified into statues of incredulity. Cody's expression was inscrutable, but he was tense in every little movement, the clenching of his fists, the tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes never wavered from the screen. Robin, Christine, and the others shared silent looks, their faces a blend of shock, fear, and confusion. Mary's mind raced. Each second stretched like hours. She could feel every heartbeat echoing in her ears as she considered the weight of the moment. The entire trajectory of her life, the stability of her family, her reputation, her very identity, all hung in the balance. She had a choice: succumb to the humiliation and collapse under the weight of public exposure, or rise, fight, and reclaim control of her narrative. She drew a deep, slow breath, attempting to quell the tempest in her chest. Her tightly clenched fists relaxed somewhat, her frantic thoughts, threatening to overwhelm her with fear and rage, centered on one thing: the truth. There was more to this video than met the eye, a context unseen, a subtlety that could altogether change the understanding of what had just transpired. And she alone could tell it. Her voice, when it arrived, was quiet at first, nearly lost in the hum of the courtroom. But as she went on, it grew stronger, more convinced, more powerful. I will tell the truth, she stated, her voice firm even as there was a quaver of feeling underneath. And nothing in this video tells the whole story. A ripple of interest coursed through the courtroom. The jury leaned forward, the judge raised an eyebrow, and even the smug smile of the opposing lawyer wavered, if only for an instant. Meri felt the very gentle shift. She had sown the seed of doubt, the initial crack in the dam, which threatened to engulf her. As she went on, she found herself thinking back over the chain of events that had brought her to this place. It had begun months earlier, a personal feud with a person she had trusted without question, a betrayal that was minor at the time, but had blown up into a public scandal. The video was edited, made to look as though she was guilty, to make her look bad. And now, it had been weaponized in the most ruthless way imaginable. Dragged into a courtroom, dissected frame by frame, broadcast to a jury and an audience eager for drama. Meri's gaze swept the courtroom. She saw the curiosity in the eyes of the jurors, the barely restrained excitement of the reporters, and the collective anticipation of the public who had been following her life for years. Each of them an obstacle, a potential danger, or an ally, albeit one she couldn't yet discern. She needed to tread carefully. Each word, each look, each hesitation had the power to tip the balance of perception. Then, as if she could feel the gravity of the moment itself, she let her guard down for one fleeting instant of naked honesty. Her tone grew softer, and a tremor of exposure crept in. "This video, it doesn't describe me," she said, addressing the jury. "It doesn't depict the story of who I am, the decisions I've made, or the love and devotion I have for my family. What you see here is only a piece of a puzzle that has been intentionally manipulated." The courtroom was holding its breath. The judge's pen rested poised above the bench. The opposing attorney's eyes contracted ever so slightly, and the jurors glanced at each other with barely perceptible nods. Meri felt the tension, heavy enough to cut with a knife, but also a tiny spark of power. She was no longer merely responding. She was demanding attention, taking back her story word by word. Her heart continued to pound, but resolve took the place of terror. She was ready to deal with every accusation, every implication, every hushed verdict, and she would do it her way. The video had been made to kill her, perhaps, but she would take it and make it the very vehicle that vindicated her strength, her bravery, and her honor. With one last, measured breath, she stiffened her shoulders, raised her chin, and locked the eyes of the opposing attorney with a calm ferocity that even she hadn't seen coming. "I am here to speak the truth," she said, louder now, firmer, indelible. "And when you hear it, I believe you will see why this video is not what it appears." A whisper went around the courtroom again, but this time, it was less critical and more inquiring, as though the audience collectively had the realization that the tale was far from concluded. Meri had taken charge of the narrative, and in an instant the tide turned. Although the video had rocked her world, the courtroom was soon to see a side of Meri Brown that no one anticipated. A side of strength, determination, and unbreakable courage. And when the first session of testimony opened, everyone knew one thing, without a doubt: this was just the beginning of a scandal, a fight, and a tale that would captivate the world. Meri drew a deep, centering breath as she approached the witness stand. Each step in the courtroom rang out, each metallic click of her heels, reminding her of the millions at home watching, the millions judging, and the millions wondering if she would fall apart or stand. The glare of cameras made her eyes shine, catching the fear, the rage, and the resolve churning within. The opposing lawyer, sensing an opportunity to strike, leaned forward. "So, Mrs. Brown," she began, her voice dripping with accusation, "you admit that this video exists?" "Yes," said Meri, her voice quivering just a little, just enough to remind the court she was human. But beneath the quiver, there was steel, a determination to hold fast against a barrage of examination and manipulation. "I acknowledge it exists, but acknowledging its existence does not acknowledge guilt or malfeasance. There's context to each moment, each action, that the video wholly overlooks." The attorney's smile set. "Context? This video paints a very clear picture, doesn't it? A picture of deception, of betrayal." Meri stood firm, confronting each charge with unflappable composure. "No, what this video demonstrates is partial. It has been manipulated, warped, and stripped of the truth lying behind the occurrence depicted. You are shown a piece, but you are not shown the tale, the fear, the intention, or the context to the circumstances that gave rise to that instant." A charged silence descended in the courtroom. All 12 jurors angled forward, their gaze on Meri. The judge's face was impassive, but the minute tilt of his head suggested interest, as though he knew the significance of what was to be told. Cameras zoomed in, recording each subtlety, the tremble of her lip, the clench of her fists, the deep, deliberate breaths she took to keep her calm. "I trusted someone," Meri went on, her voice dropping to a whisper, a hint of sadness in it. Someone I thought I knew well betrayed that trust. They used this private moment and let it be an instrument against me. And now it's used against me to misrepresent my intent, my integrity, and my dedication to my family. Gasps filled the air, soft but perceptible. The courtroom was now a theater of emotion. Cody's face hardened. He fought to contain his rage and defend his wife, but he could do nothing but sit and watch events spiral out of control. Robin and Christine looked at each other in awkward discomfort, their faces reflecting the tension between family loyalty and shock at the scandal unfolding. The other attorney leaned forward, her voice honed to a knife. So you're saying the video can be harmful if they view it without context? How are they going to believe your version of things over the evidence before them? Mary's eyes widened, and for an instant the courtroom paused as if collectively holding its breath. Because the truth won't fit within a few seconds, she declared firmly. Because actual life, human emotion and context are infinitely more nuanced than can be edited into a salacious clip. And because I am here, ready to offer the story no one else will. A murmur swept through the onlookers. Even the cynics among the press seemed fascinated. Here was a woman who had been painted as dainty, who had been criticized by millions, standing in the center of a maelstrom of emotions with braveness that would not be ignored. She exuded sincerity, her candor unquestionable, and the room sensed the change. The story was no longer merely about the video. It was about the human who created it, struggling for truth and dignity. Mary's mind drifted to her children, the ones who had been shielded from the public as much as possible, yet now inevitably entwined in this chaos. She thought of the trust she wanted to rebuild, the family she wanted to protect. Every word she spoke was a shield, every pause a careful strategy to maintain credibility. I know that this is hard to believe, she explained, her voice cracking ever so slightly, causing the courtroom to lean in a little closer. But I assure you there is more to this than what you are being shown. This video does not sum up me, my intentions, or my love for my family. It's only a piece of a manipulated tale, a tale I will now recount in its entirety. The judge cleared his throat, signaling the seriousness of the proceedings, but also an acknowledgement that Mary's testimony had struck a chord. Even the opposing lawyer, who had started the session with a confident smirk, now showed signs of unease. Doubt had begun to seep into the carefully constructed narrative of guilt she had tried to enforce. Mary paused for a moment to collect herself. She swept the jury with one level gaze after the other. Every juror looked more focused, some inclining the slightest bit forward, others sharing secret glances that defied discretion. They were hearing her now, not only what she said, but how she felt, what she believed, and how much guts it required to stand up for the spotlight and the court of law simultaneously. I stand here not just to clear my name, Mary finished, her voice firm and clear now, but to lay bare the truth of how easily things can be manipulated, how fast trust can be destroyed, and how easily a small piece of truth can be used as a weapon. I am here to take back my narrative, to prove that honesty, courage, and integrity are more powerful than manipulation and fear. The courtroom fell still, the gravity of her words hanging over all of them like an oppressive, impenetrable fog. The opposing attorney stumbled, grasping for a response, but no response presented itself at first. The jury looked at one another with expressions that conveyed the depth of their thoughts. Certainly they were curious, unsure, and first time ever, doubting the story that had been laid before them. Mary went back to her seat, her heart still pounding but lighter of heart. She had weathered the initial onslaught of accusations, remained steadfast in the center of the storm, and above all she had started to change the perception of everyone in that courtroom. The video had begun as a tool meant to kill her, but by virtue of honesty, by being a courageous and emotional truth-teller, she had started to turn the tide of perceptions. As the proceedings went on, the gravity of the courtroom drama started to fall into place as something more suspenseful than ever before. The jurors could now tell that the case was not as easy as it seemed, and the audience realized that the war had just been waged. Mary sat back in her chair, her eyes drifting over to Cody briefly. His face relaxed, a combination of relief and pride spreading across it. They had survived storms before, but this was something different. The courtroom was no longer a space where judgment was handed out. It had become a platform for truth, endurance, and the gradual exposure of secrets that had the potential to alter everything. And as the next witness was brought in, the air in the room became even more tight with anticipation, a guarantee that more secrets were to be revealed, more drama to unfold, and more suspense still to be had. Meri Brown had passed the first test, but the tempest was just beginning, and the courtroom would never be the same. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the focus shifted from Meri's emotional testimony to the intricate web of family relationships that had now been thrust into public view. The air was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Cameras captured every flicker of expression, every whispered word, every subtle gesture that could betray a hidden emotion. What began as a scandal involving a doctored video was rapidly turning into an all-out family battleground. Cody Brown sat rigidly in the front row, his normally calm composure shattered by the tempest raging before him. His fists were clenched, jaw set hard, and dark-eyed, bristling with anger and confusion. He longed to defend Meri, to protect her from the torrent of judgment, but the courtroom walls rendered it impossible. Each look he exchanged with Meri was freighted with unspoken words, a silent request for understanding, for patience, for strength. At their backs, the other wives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Robin's eyes flicked around the room, watching for threats, actual and perceived, ready to deflect each suggestion before it could be made. Christine's lips were pursed into a tight line, her feelings locked away tightly, but there was the occasional nervous flutter of her fingers betraying the tension she sought to conceal. Even Janelle, normally poised, looked momentarily flustered, her eyes darting nervously from the screen to the lawyers and Meri herself. The other lawyer was quick to exploit the family dynamics. "Mrs. Brown," she said, turning her eyes to the family, "your family members are here, hopefully to stand behind you. But are they witnesses to the truth, or have they been kept in the dark, unaware of what this video truly depicts?" The room erupted in tension. Murmurs and whispered reactions ran through the courtroom like electricity. Every family member stiffened, unsure whether to speak, defend, or retreat. Meri's children, who had been seated discreetly at the back, clutched each other's hands, sensing the weight of their family's private life spilling into a public arena. Their eyes widened with both fear and fascination as they watched the courtroom turn into a stage for old grievances and raw emotion. Meri's mind raced. She had always known that her family's dynamics were complicated, that each relationship carried its own history, secrets, and unspoken tensions. But this public exposure was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Each fleeting look, each exchanged word, each feeling bare on the courtroom floor heightened the stakes. She understood that the video was not only a weapon against her as an individual, it had become a trigger that could fan the unresolved tensions and insecurities of the whole family. The first family member to be called to the stand was Cody. The normally steadfast patriarch was now faced with the impossible task of defending the honor of his wife, while protecting his own integrity. "I trust Meri," he started guardedly, voice firm but laced with emotion. "I know her heart, her intentions, and her integrity. This video, it does not define who she is. It does not define our family's reality." His words were genuine, but they only just scratched the surface of the courtroom's criticism. The other lawyer pushed harder, interweaving questions intended to bring doubt and suspicion. "And yet, you've had moments of disagreement, moments of distance, moments when the truth might have been concealed from you. How can the jury be sure you weren't deceived?" Cody's jaw tightened, and his gaze flashed quickly to Meri. There was tension. Each member of the family was living in a precarious equilibrium, each leaning on the others and yet susceptible to the revelation of deep-buried tensions. The courtroom had become a platform upon which the intimate vulnerabilities of a polygamous family were now public spectacle, and each member of the family had a part voluntarily or involuntarily. Meri's own voice, when she addressed the jury again, was calm but piercing. "Family dynamics are complicated," she said, "especially when love, loyalty, and history are intertwined. This video doesn't show the trust we've built, the understanding we've fostered, or the sacrifices we've made. It is a fragment, a distortion, and yet it is being used to define us publicly." Her words fell with the force of pebbles, rippling across the room. The jury, already engaged by her passionate testimony, now were beginning to see the larger picture. The pressures, the loyalty, and the vulnerabilities that had always lain hidden behind the scenes. Even the opposing attorney was momentarily shaken, her carefully constructed picture of deceit fighting against the burden of actual human complexity. Then followed the subtle but erosive moments, the little, almost imperceptible cracks in the family's public facade. A hushed row between two siblings on the live feed. A momentary glance of betrayal shared by one of the wives and Meri. Each tiny act, magnified by the high-powered glow of cameras and onlookers, added to the pressure. The courtroom was now more than just a setting for legal proceedings. It had become a crucible, heating the bonds of the family under pressure too strong to be dismissed. Meri felt the emotional strain on herself, her children, and on her family. She recognized that weathering the court hearing would not suffice. They would need to contend with the lingering effects of public scrutiny, shattered trust, and media rumor. But in spite of the strain, a determination fell over her heart. She had been examined before, and although the stakes were greater than ever, she was ready to battle for her family, her reputation, and the truth. Lastly, as the session neared its conclusion, the opposing attorney attempted one final biting stab at shattering the family's image. "Can the jury really think the Browns are united?" she said, her tone cutting through the courtroom. "Or is this just a desperate family trying to protect one of their own at the expense of some ugly realities?" A heavy silence descended upon them, punctured only by the quiet rustle of papers and distant camera clicks. All of the family members sat immobilized, knowing that their relationships, loyalty, and reputation were being sized up before them in the moment. But within that tension, Meri felt a glimmer of resilience. She knew that the truth was on her side, although the courtroom hadn't yet realized it to its fullest degree. As she took her seat, the weight of emotional testimony was suspended in the air. The jury had not only seen a scandal but a family stripped bare. Its cracks, its loyalty, and its fight to survive the unyielding scrutiny of public judgment. And at that point, one thing was certain. This video's after effects would not be contained in court. It would resonate throughout every aspect of their existence, bringing secrets, deceptions, and unresolved conflicts to the forefront, and the family would never be the same. The courtroom hearing was adjourned, but the storm it had created had just begun. Meri Brown had weathered the initial impact, but she realized the real battle, truth over manipulation, loyalty over doubt, courage over fear, was just getting underway. The courtroom had been charged from the start, each moment heavy with emotion and expectation. But now, with tension in the air, something remarkable was about to occur, a turn that would alter the entire course of the case. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the crowd collectively held its breath, and even the judge leaned forward ever so slightly, feeling that a turning point was ahead. A man emerged, quiet, assertive, and unnervingly calm. He wore a briefcase that seemed to contain more than paper. It was imbued with the power to destroy it all. The other lawyer's smirk wavered, catching on to the hint that the momentum might be turning. "This witness," she said hesitantly, "is a digital forensics expert. He's seen the video at issue and is willing to come in and testify to its authenticity and context." The man nodded, uncoiled his equipment, and started to explain in simple, straightforward terms what had occurred. After careful study of the video, he stated, "It becomes clear that multiple frames have been altered. Some moments have been altered to present a misleading account, and sound cues have been changed to distort context. This video does not depict reality. It depicts a fabricated representation of events intended to deceive observers." The courtroom burst into whispers. People leaned into each other, muttering, reporters scribbled furiously, and jurors looked at each other with shocked expressions. The prosecuting attorney tried to cut in, but the expert's authority could not be disputed. Each sentence he uttered dismantled the case that had been constructed against Meri, making what had appeared to be incriminating evidence sound like an empty tool of manipulation. Meri felt her chest tighten, then loosen as a wave of relief washed over her. She had anticipated that the truth would eventually surface, but seeing it confirmed in real time, in front of the jury, was more powerful than she could have imagined. Her eyes met Cody's, and for a brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The storm was not over, but they had found a lifeline in the chaos. The expert went on, taking the jury through technicalities in a clear but irrefutable way. We have established, he explained, that certain frame areas were digitally altered. Contextual evidence was deleted, and timestamps were manipulated to deceive about the sequence of events. It seems the purpose of these manipulations is to fabricate scandal and raise the issue of the credibility of the subject. A murmur swept the courtroom. The other lawyer's confidence was shaken. The jury, who had tilted in the direction of suspicion mere moments ago, now sat up straight, eyes open wide, as the testimony changed so drastically. For the first time, doubt crept into the minds of those who were sure that Meri was guilty. Meri shifted slightly in her seat, almost reflexively, as if responding to the vindication that was taking place before her. She had been accused, judged, and questioned. But the truth, the unedited, undeniable truth, was now surfacing. Her voice, though soft, rang with a new strength. "I told you the video was faked," she whispered to herself, a tiny smile playing at her lips. "I told you it wasn't telling the full story." The defense attorney, losing her grip on control, tried one final verbal attack. "Even if the video is manipulated," she claimed, her voice tight with strain, "it still engages questions of judgment, intent, and character. Can we trust the defendant's testimony?" Mary's eyes, calm and unblinking, met the lawyer's. "Honesty earns trust, integrity earns respect, and courage in the face of adversity wins the day," she asserted. "I have been truthful, I have endured scrutiny, and I have stood before you and presented the truth. The edited video can be manipulated to mislead, but my words, my testimony, and the evidence now laid before you demonstrate the truth." The courtroom held her words in silence, the gravity of her conviction settling in. The jurors, previously influenced by scandal and shock, now seemed to incline toward reason and comprehension. Even the judge's face softened slightly, a faint recognition of the tide turning within the courtroom. The expert finished his testimony, giving the jury an unmistakable, unshakable conclusion. The video could not be accepted as proof of guilt. Its doctored nature had grossly perverted the reality of the circumstances, and anyone making conclusions from it alone would be misinformed. The finality of this declaration slammed into the room like a thunderclap, sending the other side grasping for an explanation. Meri breathed slowly, experiencing a surge of relief, victory, and continuing tension. She recognized the path was not all that bright. Courtroom fights were never easy, and public opinion was a formidable and unpredictable element. But the first great triumph had been won. The video, which had previously loomed as a force for the devastation of her credibility, reputation, and family relations, was now exposed as an instrument of deceit, no more damaging than the lies it was trying to spread. Cody reached over quietly and gripped her hand, a quiet show of support and recognition. The integrity of the family, though strained, had held, and the road ahead, though unclear, now contained the faint glimmer of hope. At the end of the session, the courtroom was charged with electricity. The surprise twist in evidence had not just altered the legal scales, but had also raised the stakes, suspense, and drama of the case. Everyone knew that the tale was long from being told. The struggle between truth and deception, between perception and reality, would go on. And in that charged, tense moment, one thing was certain. The doctored video had been strong, but Meri Brown's courage, integrity, and fortitude were stronger. The courtroom and the world outside would never forget the dramatic surprise that had shifted the momentum of this salacious case. The courtroom was charged with tension. Testimony, revelations, and emotional showdowns for hours had all built up to this moment. All viewers leaned forward. The jurors breathed in unison, and even the composed demeanor of the judge could not conceal the load of expectation. This was the moment, the peak, when truth, fearlessness, and dishonesty would meet, and the verdict would not only decide the fate of the case, but that of Meri Brown's reputation and household. Meri sat silently in her chair, her hands locked together, knuckles pale, her heart beat violently, every sound resonating in her head. She had been questioned before, withstood the scrutiny of millions, and weathered waves of betrayal and manipulation, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the gaze upon her tighter,
and the repercussions potentially irreparable. Cody sat next to her, his fingers caressing hers in a quiet expression of solidarity. For an instant, their eyes met, a mutual comprehension flashing between them. Regardless of the result, they had weathered the tempest side by side. Beyond them, the remainder of the family stood in strained silence. The tension of being
exposed and emotionally drained etched upon their faces. The foreman of the jury stood up, the crumpled paper in his hand, containing the verdict. A silence descended over the courtroom. Cameras snapped as each movement, each expression was recorded. The audience leaned forward. Sheeter, even the opposing attorney, who had been so confident and forceful throughout the trial, paused, her earlier smirk erased and replaced by the flicker of uncertainty. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge inquired, his tone firm but with an undercurrent of eagerness. The foreperson nodded. "We have, Your Honor." There was a pause, filling the silence with almost unbearable tension. The air seemed to thicken until it was possible to feel the tension. Then, with slow deliberation, the foreperson started to read. "We, the jury, find in favor of the defendant, Meri Brown." The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs. Some gasped, others sighed in relief, and a few exchanged looks of disbelief. Mary's body seemed to release a weight she hadn't realized she had been carrying. Her hands unclenched, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in months, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. She had survived, not only the courtroom battle, but also the storm of public judgment and emotional chaos. But the relief was softened by the stark awareness of what had been revealed. The video had been exposed, secrets had been brought to light, and although the court battle had been won, the ripple effects were only just starting. Her family had been brought into the open, vulnerabilities revealed, and the world had witnessed both their strength and their cracks. Meri realized the process of healing, trust rebuilding, and privacy reclaiming would be a long one. Cody came back to her, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. "You were amazing," he said softly. "You met all of it head-on with bravery." Meri clamped his hand in hers, sensing the power of what they shared. "We made it," she said quietly. "But there is so much to repair, and so much that people don't know yet." The defense attorney stacked her documents, her expression one of respect and frustration. Despite her attempts to turn things around and use the scandal as a weapon, she could not help but admit the truth had won out. The courtroom had seen a truly stunning exhibition of determination, honesty, and resilience, and the power dynamic was forever changed. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed the scene, cameras flashing, microphones in faces, grabbing every nuance of Mary's response. Questions rained down, some accusatory, some sympathetic, all driven by interest and the salacious nature of the case. Meri responded with a calm demeanor, selecting words carefully to preserve dignity and control over her narrative. "The truth matters," she stated, "and no doctored video, no matter how salacious, can characterize who I am or the love I hold for my family." As the courtroom cleared, muttering persisted, and word of the leaked video started circulating through media channels and social media. The tension remained, a guarantee that this sensational revelation was only part of a much greater saga. The family had weathered the public maelstrom, but the emotional residue and ongoing questions guaranteed that the melodrama was far from over. As Meri emerged from the courthouse into the sunlight, she breathed deeply, tasting victory but also the price. She had weathered exposure, judgment, and betrayal, and had come out not only unbroken but stronger. The public had glimpsed a hint of the private tempest she endured, but they did not yet know the full narrative of resilience, courage, and determination that shaped her. And in that instant, one irrefutable fact was certain. The video had incited scandal, yet it could not bring down Meri Brown. She had taken back her story, defended her family, and established that integrity and courage could survive even the most severe tests. The verdict was merely the commencement, and though the world would go on to observe, criticize, and gossip, Meri was aware of one thing for certain: she would confront whatever lay ahead with unyielding resilience. The courthouse doors closed behind her, signaling the end of one chapter, but the suspense lingered in the air. The story was far from finished. Secrets, betrayals, and family drama still simmered beneath the surface, hinting at more revelations to come. The video may have been exposed, the trial may have concluded, but the Brown family saga and Mary's resilience would continue to captivate and shock the world.